Just to set the stage a little bit as we dive into this passage in Luke chapter 16, to do so, we need to go back to the beginning of Luke chapter 15. And looking at Luke chapter 15, in the first couple verses, we would read, "Then drew near unto him, unto Jesus, all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners, and eateth with them. And he spake this parable unto them, saying," and we're going to stop there for a second. So just to give you the image of the moment, Jesus has been teaching. As he's been teaching, people have been gathering. He's got a gathering. We don't know exactly how big, but we get the sense that it's a crowd. And this crowd includes his disciples, as always. It also includes, in this case, tax collectors, publicans, and I don't know how many tax collectors there were. So either it was a huge gathering of tax collectors that all of a sudden showed up, or this also starts to give us an image of other people that were the undesirables that are coming, right? So we have tax collectors as the worst of them, and then AKA sinners as everybody else that also is undesirable have gathered to be with Jesus and to listen. And watching are the Pharisees and the scribes, and who are murmuring, and they're complaining, and they're talking about Jesus. And Jesus takes the moment to start to talk about, to share parables. And he shares a parable here that we've actually referenced and preached on in the past. He starts off with the parable of the lost sheep, which we aren't going to dive into, right? But that's Matthew 18. And so we get the sense that he's actually talking to the Pharisees here as he dives into the parable of the lost sheep. And then he goes on with multiple other parables. So he starts with the parable of the lost sheep and the idea of how precious each individual is, and that an owner of 100 sheep, if one of them were to go astray, the owner would go to find the one, to reclaim it, to bring it back and to rejoice. And so from that, he follows up with the next one, the next parable, and the next parable that he reads them tells them is the parable of the lost coin, about the person and the woman who loses a precious coin, and how diligently she searches for that lost coin. And when she finds it, how much she rejoices and is happy that she found one. Right? And it's not like, well, I've got 9 more. No, it's how precious the one that I found. From that, the parable of the lost son, the prodigal son, and the famous parable there that he talks to them about. And he builds on all of those as he gets up to Luke chapter 16. And in Luke 16, we get to a parable that we're going to dive into. It's the parable of the unjust steward. And for many people, this is considered one of the more complicated parables. And so we're going to take a dive into a complicated and challenging parable to understand. And so that's where we're going to be at today. But to start us off, I want you to imagine, just before we dive into Luke chapter 16, I want you to imagine a young father. Or if you've been there, imagine back in the day when you were a young father with a young child. If you haven't been there yet, imagine being there. Imagine being a young father with a young child, newly married, diligent. This young father was diligent to make sure that he was saving money to think about the future. And this young father was even, through work, was putting money away in the 401k, right? So putting money in his bank account, putting money in retirement, thinking for the future. And doing that for years. He had a great relationship with coworkers. He had a great relationship with his boss. He would go to his boss's house for events that the boss would host. It was so nice that the boss was hosting, having everybody over, having picnics and barbecues. While he was at his boss's house, he marveled that his boss bought both of his daughters brand new cars. The boss's daughters were going to be going away to private schools. And then one day he found out that his boss had never taken the money that he'd put aside to go into his 401k. His boss had never put that money into the 401k. For years, every paycheck, the money hadn't gone into the savings account that the employee, that this young father had been putting aside. In effect, the boss had been stealing from this young father to significant sums. How would you feel if you were the young father? Right? You're diligently saving. You're diligently working. You're diligently putting money aside for the future, only to have somebody take it and use it on themselves to buy their kids brand new cars, to send their kids to private schools, to throw a party with your money. Welcome to the story of the unjust steward. Let's start with the first verse in Luke chapter 16. And he said also unto his disciples, there was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. So we have two people at play here. We have the master, and we have a steward. Now, what's a steward for a second? Just so we're going to get on the same page as we look at this passage, what's a steward? Well, a steward would be a manager, right? A steward would be somebody who's responsible to take care of somebody else's goods. And so today we would consider a steward a manager. I'm managing, if I work for a company and I'm a manager, I'm responsible to manage resources, goods, people on behalf of the company. So in this time, we have a rich man, a master, who has a manager. And the sense that we get is that maybe this isn't the only manager, this might not be the only steward, but we know that the man is wealthy, that has this steward, because he has a steward. I mean, you need a lot of money to really need a manager, right? I mean, I don't know, there aren't too many of us here that have our own personal managers to kind of deal with our stuff, right? So you need to be well off to have managers. So we have a person that's well off, and he has trusted his goods, his physical resources, his stuff, to somebody who he's hired. Now, what does the rich man expect a steward or a manager to do? If you were in his shoes, what would you expect? Well, we get evidence, or we get some images that Jesus has talked about previously. If we look at Matthew 25, remember the parable of the talents? We get, just reading it really quickly, Matthew 25, verse 14 through 21, we'll just do a tidbit of it. We see an image of what is expected of a steward. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And he gave unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. And straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And let's stop there. Hopefully you know this story. But the image here is of a man who's got wealth, who divides it to managers, to servants, to stewards, according to their ability. How good they are. If somebody's really good, they get a lot of them. Here, you're experienced, you're going to get 5 talents. You're a little less experienced, I'm giving you 2. You're a rookie, I'm going to give you 1. Right? And we get the image of what the steward does. He takes those resources and he works with them. And the servant and the steward that had the 5 talents makes 5 more. That's what That's reasonable, right? It's reasonable that you're working with the goods that you've been given on behalf of your master, on behalf of the Lord, on behalf of the owner, if you will. If we just jump to verse 21 in Matthew 25, his Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. So the master expects the steward to manage well, to provide increase. He expects good result, good work, an ethic. He probably doesn't expect to hear problems. I mean, if there's problems, steward, come talk to me. We're going to figure this out. I'm the owner. You're working on my behalf. We'll figure it out and we'll go from there. But if you were the master, would you expect to hear that your steward, your servant, is being accused of not taking care of your goods? Did the young father ever expect his boss, the guy that's supposed to be the rich one, to be taking his money? No, you would never, as an employee, expect your boss to be taking your money. If you're taking your money out of your paycheck and putting it into a savings account, you wouldn't expect that money to not be put in there, right? You trust that somebody is doing what they're supposed to be doing with the money that you're giving them, that you're entrusting with them. The master is entrusting the steward with money. But the steward's accused of wasting it. He's accused of, we don't know exactly doing what, but misusing it, misrepresenting it, not taking care of what he's responsible for. And so, why isn't the steward careful? Why is the steward in the position that he's in? You know, I am working so hard. I'm working so hard. And that Lord, the boss, he's on vacation. He's in the Caribbean 6 weeks out of the year. And then he's in Switzerland, skiing in the wintertime. While I'm working. I deserve this. I deserve this. It's part of my expenses for working for my boss because I deserve it. He's not going to notice. Right? Why would he notice? He's so rich. He's got all these other stewards working for him too. What's a little bit? Just a little carelessness on my part. Spending a little bit extra as I take my family out for dinner and charge it to the boss. He's got plenty. I don't really matter. I'm just going to do my part, do the best that I can. If some falls off, some slides away, some gets lost, it's not that big a deal. His resources are endless. So we don't know why the steward wasted money. What we do know is that it wasn't an accident. It was intentional. We're going to find out. He knew what he was doing. And he was taking advantage of his Lord. So he gets called to the carpet. And he called him, verse 2, and said unto him, How is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship. So he gets called to a meeting with the boss. And the boss can almost sense that he's calm. He's not angry at this point, but he simply says, I'm hearing something. Show me your books. I want to see the accounts that you're responsible for. Because if it's true that you've been taking advantage of me, you're fired. Explain yourself. Explain yourself. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I can't dig. To beg, I am ashamed. And so we start to get an image of the steward. See, the steward's been a manager for a while. And in some fields, I'm not going to mention which, the saying is, you know how you can tell who's a manager? Shake their hand. If they've got nice, soft hands, they don't do any work. Those of us that are in the fields, we get calluses. We dig. We work. Now, we're not going to go down that path. But the point is, the manager himself knew that he didn't have calluses on his hands. He wasn't up to digging. He wasn't going to be able to go work out in the fields like the laborers that he was responsible for. He was going to get fired. And not only was he going to get fired, but likely he wasn't going to be able to get another steward job because word would get out that he was fired because of what he had done. His references were not going to pan out. And he definitely wasn't going to go beg. So what's he going to do? I'm not in shape to be a laborer. My position has been one of leadership. I'm definitely not up to working physically, manually. My heart can't take it. My body can't take it. I got to figure something else out. And so verse 4, I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, that they may receive me into their houses. He goes, I know what I'm going to do. I have an idea. I have a solution. And it's interesting to think about this man. He didn't just give up. You can tell that he was actually probably could have been really good at what he was doing if he would have just been honest, because he was shrewd. He automatically starts thinking about what solution am I going to come up with. I've been fired, or I'm going to be fired. The books are going to clearly show that I've been kind of not really getting things to line up, that they're not going to balance out when somebody looks carefully, and so I am going to get fired. And so I got to take care of myself before I lose my job. I got to take care of myself. How can I make friends? How can I create people that owe me? How can I set up a solution, a situation where people will take me in when I lose my job? I've got this brief window that I can work within, right? Because I'm about to get fired. I've got a brief window. I have to act fast. And so he called every one of the Lord's debtors unto him in verse 5. So he calls in everybody that owes money. It's interesting, like if I was the steward and I was calling all of you to come in one by one, I wonder how you'd feel coming to the steward. Maybe you already know that this guy takes things off the top. He skims money. Maybe you already know that I'm unjust and that I might take advantage of you. But you owe money, so you got to show up, maybe a little bit hesitantly, a little bit nervously, to come see the manager because you owe money. Maybe he's going to claim that you owe more. But you're going to come see the steward. Is he going to? Maybe you've even heard that my books are being called into question. And so you're wondering, is he going to charge more? Is Bob going to charge more interest? Is he going to say you owe more so that he can try to get into his boss's good graces? But no. So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him and said unto the first, How much owest thou, my Lord? And this debtor, and he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, How much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, and write 80. So, just to kind of paint the picture, back then it was simple. You had a piece of paper, some sort of receipt, right? And the receipt was written down how much you're owing, and you sign the receipt. So, Amy, if you owed 100 measures of wheat, you would write down 100 measures of wheat, or I would write 100 measures of wheat, and you would sign your name to it. And then I would keep that as the one that gave you the 100 measures of wheat until you pay me back. And then I give you the sheet of paper that has your signature on it. You can tear it up or you keep it to show proof that it's been paid. And so the steward says, how much do you owe? Well, I owe 100 measures of wheat. Well, here, take a piece of paper, write down 80, and I'm going to and then sign it, and I'm going to take that instead of the 100. All right, so I'm going to just reduce how much you owe so that you like me. And the Lord, in verse 8, commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. Now, it's a really interesting statement that the Lord makes. The word wisely here, if we look at the Greek word, is actually shrewd, prudent, not a godly wisdom, but an earthly wisdom. So this man is being commended for being shrewd, for being street smart, for knowing how to look after himself. And so in the parable, the Lord commends the servant for being shrewd. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And so Jesus interjects in this moment as he's telling this story, and we have a transition here at the end of verse 8. He finishes the story and he points something out. He points out that the children of the world are wiser than the children of light. And so who's he talking about here? Because he's making a point. And remember who he's talking to. At the beginning of Luke chapter 15, he's talking to publicans and sinners, to his disciples, and to the Pharisees, right, who are listening. So the children of light would have been understood in this time by these people to be the Jewish people. So the children of light are the Jewish people. Who are the children of the world? Everyone else. Everyone else. And he says, for the children of this world are wiser than the children of light. So we're going to hold that thought for a little bit, and we're going to move on, because this is the transition, and Jesus is going to continue with almost like the explanation, except that the explanation makes you go, huh? At first glance. And so let's keep reading. Verse 9, and I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of mammon of unrighteousness, that when you fall, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. And so that's the transition. And when I break that down, it doesn't matter which translation you use. On the surface, there's a to this verse. But the transition now, Jesus transitions from talking about the parable and this earthly master, this rich man. The transition is to us and to the people that are listening as the explanation goes, right? And so to start off, let's talk about who the master is. Well, the master, as we think about the parable now and the explanation, the master is God. Fair? We're not talking about a rich man. We're talking about God, who has all wealth. Who has all wealth. Who owns all the resources. Who everything belongs to. That's the relationship. Right? That's the transition. So just to start, that's where we're at. And as we dive into it, just remember that before God, before this rich man, there's nobody that's good enough, right? For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. For our unrighteousness is for all of us, our unrighteousness is as filthy rags. Our righteousness is as filthy rags, excuse me. And so none of us are appropriate. None of us are good enough. None of us are successful enough. So just to start there, and now let's dive into verse 9 again. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitation. So at face value, what is this saying? At face value, Jesus seems to be saying, ready? Listen carefully. Look at other translations. See if I'm getting it wrong. At face value, Jesus seems to say, use earthly wealth or earthly resources to make friends. Use money to make friends. Make to yourselves friends with or of the mammon, which is money, which is resources, of unrighteousness. Unrighteousness would be earthly in this case, not that I'm cheating people to get it, or that it's not stolen money. It's worldly money, worldly resources, earthly wealth. Use earthly wealth and resources to make friends. Well, that's pretty straightforward, right? I'm going to buy my friends. That's what he's saying. I'm going to use money to make friends. The more money you have, the more friends you can get. It usually works that way. The prodigal son did that really well, right? He used his money, he had a lot of friends. When he ran out of money, he ran out of friends, though. We're not buying our friends here. That's not what Jesus is saying. Let's just be clear. But he does continue to say that when I fail or when the money fails. Right? Either one works. We're not sure exactly which this means. Some say that it's when I fail. Others say when the money fails, but when the resources fail. But here's the point, that when the resources fail, let's just use that one for a second. Use my resources to make friends so that when the resources fail or when I am dead, those friends that I have made will embrace me when I get to heaven. On the surface, it really doesn't make sense to us that I'm supposed to use money to make friends so that when the resources are gone or when I'm dead and I get to heaven, they're going to be there to embrace me. So let's break it down a little bit in the last 5 minutes or so. Make to yourselves friends. Get close to people. Develop a relationship. Become friends. Right? That's what we are called to do. With the resources that we have, we are called to develop relationships. And we're supposed to use the resources that we have. The mammon of unrighteousness is earthly wealth. It's monetary resources, physical resources, worldly resources. It's what we've been given. But that right there starts to unravel this question, is what I just said. The resources, what? That we have been given. Because who do the resources belong to? God. We're stewards. We're stewards. And we've been given. And Jesus says, use what we've been given. We're supposed to use worldly wealth and resources to help and benefit these people. We don't know who these people are yet. But we're not using our resources. We're using his resources, because everything we've been given belongs to him. Right? And we have a hard time with that sometimes, and I'll tell you that the Pharisees, who he was telling this passage to, have an extremely hard time with that. If you go to Matthew 23, not 25, we were already in Matthew 25. If you go to Matthew 23, where Jesus is harping and just hammering the Pharisees, over and over again, he points out to them that their focus is on money. He points out that he says, don't pray and kind of focus on the temple, but on the gold in the temple. That's what you do, right? He says you don't look at the altar, you look at what's the gift that's being given on the altar. You're constantly focused on the physical. You're constantly focused on how rich it is and on having. You're going to throw away widows for their house so that you can get that money. He calls out to the Pharisees. And so this parable and this explanation is also directly to the Pharisees, who are really focused on gain, not giving. And so this parable tries to shift the paradigm, that it's not about getting. It's not about accruing. It's actually about distributing. Because our master who has everything, doesn't need us to gain him more money. It all belongs to him. What he wants to gain is souls. And so he gives so that he can get. But not in the traditional sense. He doesn't need more resources. They're his. He needs more souls. He wants more souls. And so the key to understanding this passage is actually the last phrase. The people receiving our money or our resources are going to be in heaven. Right? They're going to be in heaven is this image that we're given. Who's going to be in heaven? Well, we all know that the saved, those that believe in Jesus Christ, are going to be in heaven. But Jesus, at this point, hasn't given that away yet to the disciples and to the Pharisees and to anybody else. So if we think about what Jesus has already said and what the people would understand who's going to be in heaven, right, this parable starts to make a lot of sense. But you have to go and think about the different things that Jesus has already said. And if we go to Matthew chapter 5 and the Sermon on the Mount, right, that's where we find some hints or some little inklings about who Jesus is describing here. And so the key to understanding this is that the people that receive this money are going to be in heaven. Jesus has already made some really strong statements about this. The people that are here, both his disciples, maybe the Pharisees, maybe not, they heard the Sermon on the Mount, but some of these other people have probably already gotten word of this. And so let's look at Matthew 5, verses 2 to 12. And Jesus, he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." For what? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So who's going to be in heaven? Those that recognize that they are spiritually bankrupt and poor and have no righteousness of themselves. and turn to God for his righteousness. Those that are poor in spirit. So blessed are the poor in spirit, those that recognize how bankrupt they are. Who else does Jesus reference in Matthew 5? Well, let's look at verse 10. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake. For what? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So now we have a second group of people, those that are persecuted. For who? For God. Those that are persecuted and condemned for their belief in Jesus Christ, for their belief in hanging on God as their Savior. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. So we have a third group of people that are going to be in heaven. Those are that are the persecuted, those that are the laughed at, those that are the scoffed, those that are the ones that nobody wants to be with because of their belief. Those that nobody wants to hire because of their belief. And so let's bring this full circle. Those are the people that are going to be in heaven. And those are the ones that we need to help and support and strengthen and uplift with the resources that God has given us. Brother and sister and friend, you haven't earned your resources. The money that you have is not because you're smart or because you're shrewd or because you're so good. The money that we have and the resources that we have and everything that we've been given is not because of how hard we've worked. The economy can crash. The stock market can fail. Prices can plummet. And everything will be worthless tomorrow. It's God's. Everything we have, anything we have, is because of him. And we are called in this parable to use it wisely, to distribute wisely for the kingdom. And if we do, when we get to heaven, those people that we supported will be there with open arms to greet us. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust in much. Right? So God then Jesus starts to outline some really clear principles here for those that are listening, which includes us today. That if I can be faithful in the little that I've been given, then I can be trusted. But if I can't even be faithful with the little that we've been given, and all of us have been given little, no matter how much we have, it's little. And it's temporary. It's so temporary because life is so fleeting. And if I can't be trusted with the little that I've been given, how can I be trusted with the kingdom of heaven? How can I be trusted with stewardship within the kingdom, spiritual stewardship? If I can't be trusted with physical stewardship, how can I be trusted with spiritual stewardship is the big message and the big question here. And so we need to use our physical resources wisely and distribute wisely. And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? Right? If I've been given talents by God, if I've been given work by God to distribute in the moment, and I can't do that, then how am I supposed to have my own ministry in the future? How am I supposed to have my own role on behalf of the kingdom in the future. And he goes on and he says, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And so, brother, sister, friend, everybody here, everybody who's listening, when I am anchored, and we would all say this isn't me, but in some way this is many. When I am anchored to profit, when I am anchored here and here to profit, to gain, to resources, to accumulating, to getting, I am serving an earthly master. I don't have to be rich to serve an earthly master. It's just where my heart is. Wealth is not an evil thing. If I have been given much, much is expected, the Bible says. But everything I have to use. But if my heart and my mind are focused on profit, are focused on wealth, are focused on accumulating, my heart is here, not there. And the Pharisees, also who were covetous, heard all these things, and they derided him. They scoffed. They scoffed. Because they didn't understand. And he said unto them, you are they which also justify yourselves before men, but God knoweth your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is abomination in the sight of God. Let's not be that. Let's not be that. For where your heart is, that's where you're serving. That's your master. And my prayer for all of us today is that we can recognize that to serve and to be a steward is to be one that distributes rather than accumulates. Amen.